Hello, everybody. It is Monday, the 12th of May, 2025. We live, perhaps, especially on the tech front, in hallucinatory times. One newspaper report this morning, the Seattle Times, reports that AI is not only getting more powerful, but its hallucinations, whatever those mean, are getting worse. Certainly, we've had some shows on hallucinations in AI. Last week, we did a show with the Wall Street Journal writer Keach Hagee. She has a new biography of Sam Altman coming out, and she writes about the hallucinatory character, I think, of Altman's language in terms of describing and shaping OpenAI, the dominant AI company, suggesting that Altman's trying to have his cake and eat it. 2 + 2 = 5, having both a for-profit and non-profit company simultaneously, a true unicorn. Some people might describe it as a scam or a con. My two guests today have a new book out on AI, and it is, appropriately enough, called The AI Con: How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. I'm thrilled that both Emily Bender and Alex Hanna, the two book's authors, are joining us. Emily, let me start with you. You're a professor of linguistics at the University of Washington. You're talking to us from Seattle. I'm not sure how much you've been following this story on OpenAI's non-profit, for-profit attempt to be everything for everybody at all times. But is the foundations, in your view, of this AI revolution a kind of linguistic scam?
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually would take issue with the phrase AI revolution to start with. It's speaking from the point of view of computational linguistics. What changed in 2022 was not some major breakthrough in technology. It was basically some clever marketing on OpenAI's part and a UI tweak. So we already had synthetic text extruding machines, as I like to call large language models, but OpenAI wrapped that up in the chatbot interface and then made this little web demo that went viral. And then since then, money has flooded in. And if it's a revolution in gullibility.
Alex, you used to work for Google, so you have some corporate experience of this too. I have to admit, I'm not entirely convinced by what Emily is saying. I mean, it seems in some ways real. Maybe it's not quite as real as these people promise. But when you use AI architecture like OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude, it kind of works, doesn't it? Is it, in your view, a complete scam? I mean, Google, of course, you used to work at Google, have their own Gemini. So all the big tech companies have their own platforms.
Well, what does it mean? What does it mean to say these things work? I mean, what do you mean when you're saying that these things function?
Well, let me explain. So, for example, and I do this, and I'm guilty, like so many other people, of using AI to cut corners. I will run this interview and put it into. I'll get a text and I'll put it into Claude, and I will ask Claude for a summary, a 5-point summary of what the three of us have talked about. Now, I will edit it, but if I was to start from scratch, it would take me hours to do. And with Claude's help, I can do the whole thing in about 15 minutes. So that's my use of Claude AI, for better or worse, maybe rather shamefully, but nonetheless, that's how I use it.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on what you mean by a particular kind of task. I mean, the kind of task that you're talking about is known as summarization, right? So taking a text, trying to pick out something of the main points. And I mean, this is a task that's been in natural language processing for quite some time. Now it's using this technology. And I think one of the problems with this, and I mean, I would agree with Emily that it is a con insofar as there are these technologies that are attempting to be everything to everyone and have this kind of notion of being a quote unquote general purpose technology. And so I don't want to shame you for using some kind of a summarization thing. And I mean, you are editing them, but you also have to think about if we were going through an interview and thinking about what it would mean to take out points that are points of human judgment, is that a skill that you should be doing on one's own? What are the kind of errors, or what are the kinds of things that are being introduced by that process? And so there are some studies that have shown that summarization tasks that these technologies do, specifically the synthetic media machines, are producing errors, are making up whole cloth some elements which didn't appear. And if you're using these for a mission critical task, then or mission critical area, then it's probably not the technology that you want to be using. So I think really thinking about what it means to say these things work or work sufficiently is an important thing to keep in mind, and much of the work in terms of what is known as evaluation in AI is pretty lacking. I mean, it's not actually saying what these things actually can do. And it's not just these areas of you raised at the top of the show hallucinations, which is a term we don't like, but there's different areas and different kinds of errors that are that are happening over and over again.
I take your point, certainly on risking people's lives, but there are, for better or worse, again, millions of people paying $20 a month to use these platforms like OpenAI. Are you suggesting that they are suffering some sort of hallucination too, that they're being scammed or conned?
So one thing I want to So first off, I don't want to, this is not the intent of the book is not to shame people for using these tools, right? There are ways in which we're all being asked to do more with less, right? That's the structure of living in a capitalist society, of having to do that. Sometimes people are using these tools because it is a new thing. They're technologists. We're technologists, but we're also social scientists. We get excited about new technology, but we also want to take into consideration that these things are being foisted on us in every arena of life. Yeah, there's a million people paying $20 a month to use these tools, or whomever, how many people are using these, but these things are still a huge loss leader. They're not actually making a lot of money with respect to the amount of money that's gone into the infrastructure to build that data centers, to do the amount of training that, and to use all the compute that goes into training these tools, to host all the machines that are doing the inference. So that's where the con comes into place. It's not that people are having, are willfully ignorant. It's that the emperor has no clothes, and we're pointing that out.
Emily, the subtitle of the new book, it's out tomorrow, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want. What is big tech's hype in your view? You're a professor of linguistics, so is this all just words one way or the other?
I mean, it's helpful to look at the words and understand how they're being used. In particular, the phrase artificial intelligence is in itself a hype move. So if we talk about intelligence, first of all, that's never defined. And when it is sort of defined, we get these definitions that trace into histories of eugenics and racism. But there's this idea that we have not just systems that we built to perform a certain task, for example, summarization, but rather a system that is somehow human-like in its, another word that I dislike is capabilities. And that salesmanship around this software makes it seem like it can do more than it actually can. It also makes it seem like it is part of some, you said AI revolution earlier, some massive sea change in the technology around us, and that therefore we have to jump on board lest we get left behind. And a big part of hype, as we talk about in the book, is this basically instigating FOMO, fear of missing out.
Alex, you've worked for Google, so you're familiar with the corporate world. I mean, don't all corporations, aren't they all in the business of creating hype, whether you're selling a car, a beer, a house, a political party? And is big tech hype in terms of trying to sell its products to all of us? Is it any worse than any other corporate hype?
So I don't know if I can come up with a rank order of hype. Sure, hype is suffuse throughout so many different things. I mean, we've had hype when it came to NFTs and the blockchain and cryptocurrencies and cars and whatnot. I mean, hype itself is something that associates, different companies have affiliated with their products from, since they were the first admin out there. I'm not a historian of hype, although maybe there is a academic field that is in formation called hype studies, which is interesting. We're specifically focused on this particular sort of hype because of how it operates in the world and what's behind it. And so the the particularities about AI hype is, first, hype more or less functions on the fear of missing out. So you must use this tool. If you don't use this tool, you're going to be left behind. You won't have the skills in the workplace. You aren't going to get good grades in school. You're going to just completely be someone that's left in the dust. AI hype functions in such a way because there's a parlor trick. The parlor trick is that you have this interface, this chat GPT, this Claude, this Gemini or whatever. You feed it some kind of a prompt. The prompt outputs something that looks like human generated text because it is a sequence of word forms that are strung together from probabilities learned from the training data. That is enough substance then to hang the shingle of hype upon and say that this is a revolutionary technology, and that this revolutionary technology is so good it can replace people at their jobs. It can replace graphic designers at work. It can do things like skilled nursing, and it can teach your kids. That is a particular sort of hype that emerges from this particular sort of technology, and that's what makes it somewhat unique in terms of tech hype more generally. But you're absolutely right. I mean, tech hype, car hype, whatever. I mean, there's hype around many different things. And so what we're doing in the book is that we're isolating this particular sort of hype and saying how it operates in the world.
You've lived through a number of these cycles, these hype cycles. The last one, of course, was the Web 2.0, the social media hype. Is this any different substantively from the FOMO of suggesting that everybody needs to be online and make virtual friends and communicate online?
I think it's a little bit different in the way it threatens people's jobs. That the previous hype around Web 2.0 and etc. Sure, there was some like notion of automation in there, and some, if you're not doing this, you're going to be missing out. But there wasn't this technology being sold to managers saying, "Oh, you can dispense with paying people salaries because this system, just pay us instead, and we'll automate all of that for you." I think that's the big difference.
Alex, maybe you can answer this one too. Is it conscious? You've worked at Google. Do the big tech companies, do they know what they're doing here? Are they consciously...
Sorry, I misunderstood the question. I thought you were asking if the software was conscious. You mean, is this intentional on the part of companies?
I mean, no.
Oh, I also thought...
I appreciate your answer on the previous one, Emily. But for Alex, I mean, you've worked in Google, and you know lots of people. You're based in the Bay Area. Is this conscious on the part of companies like Anthropic and Google and OpenAI and Microsoft and Amazon? Do they know what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they know what they're doing. I mean, you have to look at the venture capital expenditure in the past few cycles. So in Q4, oh yeah, you brought up here. So tech,
300
mega
billion.
300 billion into 2020, 2025. There was an article at Sherwood News that Raina Mola published where they did analysis based on PitchBook data. There was $27 billion in Q4 of 2024 of investment in artificial intelligence companies, and this was half of all VC investment, right? So the market is huge here in terms of where people think that they can get in on it. There's a huge amount of spending, right? There's an AI product for damn near everything these days, right? And so it is. I mean, these folks are cognizant of what they're doing. They're trying to position themselves in particular places. The big players here, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, less of the degree to Amazon and Apple, but what they're doing there is that they're licensing. They've got either on Apple, they're trying to, they had a contract that they put out for what would live on their phones, and that that contract went to OpenAI for their Apple Intelligence, which they're now kind of walking back on after there's been a huge press cycle around the errors. Amazon is to some degree selling some of those some of the shovels there to along with NVIDIA to run the hardware. And so, yeah, I mean, they know what they're doing. There's a huge windfall that is potentially on the way for promoting these technologies.
So, Emily, thinking of this in linguistic terms, I mean, there've been many technological revolutions before: the car, the railway, electricity. Is it always the case that the producers, the so to speak, generators of these revolutionary technologies, are creating hype in terms of selling? Isn't that just given? That's the nature of the market, the nature of economics.
So I'm a linguist, not an economist, but I want to pick up on the comparison you just made to electricity, because we are often told that large language models in particular represent a new general purpose technology that can be used in many, many different ways. And so the people selling these things are positioning them as if they were like, and electricity is an example that often comes up, but of course, electricity isn't actually a technology. The technology around electricity is the transistors and the circuits and all that stuff that we build to manage electricity, which is a natural phenomenon. That aside, large language models are not a general purpose technology in the sense that they don't actually have a function that can be used to do many different things reliably. And here, I think of the work of Dr. Timnit Gebru, who pioneered something called data sheets for data sets, inspired by the data sheets that you get for electronics components that said, look, this is the range of tolerances you can expect for this thing. Large language models are designed just to repeatedly answer the question, what's a likely next word? And that is not a useful basis to do anything with. So back to your question, do we always hype things when we sell them? I mean, I imagine that's marketing, but there can still be a question about, is the thing being sold itself valuable or not? And I think there's a big difference there.
Alex, Emily brought up Timnit Gebru. I think you worked with her at Google.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Neither of you are any longer there. We actually had a few years ago Margaret Mitchell on the show, another person who once worked at Google in AI. What about your own personal history? Were you ever a believer? Are you someone who has soured on AI, given your background, given that you had worked at Google in AI research?
I mean, yeah. So I had been on Timnit's and Meg's team, so I worked closely with both of them, and I think I mean, I don't think I would call myself ever a believer in the class of AI technology or the large language model technology that we see now. And partially is because what the stochastic parrots paper that both Emily and Timnit worked on was was a big portion of that, about the surveys I had seen on that, the different kinds of reports on that seemed very concerning. And so, that's not to say that things like machine learning and pattern recognition at scale isn't interesting or helpful. So one thing I've told folks is, for my dissertation, I had trained a language model to do classification of particular sort of news text, and had done that for a very specified task of identifying mentions of protests in news articles for social movement research and doing kind of classification of different issues. That's a very well defined task. But then trying to scale this up and saying these are everything machines is not helpful, because there's no way to evaluate that. It's not a well-scoped task, and there's no well-scoped evaluation for that. So, I was not a believer and then saw the light. It's more like these things I think were bad from the beginning.
Emily, Alex has set you up. You have this wonderful phrase you came up with. I think you co-authored it. Stochastic parrot. According to the Wall Street Journal, it's a name for AI that sounds a little less intelligent. I think you originally came up with it in a white paper, rather complicated technological white paper about whether language models can be too big. what does this term stochastic parrot mean? And how does it connect with this notion of hallucination, another word that's often associated with AI?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not a white paper. That was a peer-reviewed academic paper that appeared in the conference Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in 2021.
That's what I meant by, well, I mean, I'm not very good on these. I'm an amateur when it comes to describing these things, but that's what I think of it. It's on white anyway, and it's on paper.
Yeah. No, white papers are things that come out of think tanks and don't go through peer
Okay,
review.
I see.
So that's an important
So
distinction.
it's a seriously research piece. It's not some op-ed, right?
Yeah, indeed. It is a research paper. And the phrase stochastic parrot is meant to make vivid what's actually happening when people use large language models to produce synthetic text. And so stochastic is a sort of obscure word, but it's got a nice rhythm to it. That means randomly according to a probability distribution. So like rolling a weighted die, where the weights on the die have to do with all of the words in the training data. And then we use parrot, not to disparage the actual birds, which are lovely, and I'm pretty sure do have some sort of internal life. But instead, with reference to this English verb to parrot, which is to repeat back without understanding. So we're trying to make vivid that these things, which, as of 2020, when we were writing that paper, we were looking at GPT-3. This is before it was wrapped up in the chat interface in ChatGPT. But it was pretty clear that it was possible to create synthetic text that looked very realistic. And we wanted people to know that to not be fooled by that. That there is no communicative intent behind that text. It's not somebody trying to tell you something. It is just randomly outputting words without understanding them according to the probability distribution from the training data.
And in linguistic terms, and coming back to my use of it, the quality of the writing, in my view, and I talked earlier about sometimes using it, but I always use it, having edited it significantly, it always seems to me to be not just poorly written, but written in a way as if a machine, quote unquote, had written it.
I mean, that is what happens.
Exactly, that's what it is. So
yeah. And I mean,
there's what one would expect.
There's no spark there. There's no human connection because there's no human behind it. And is it Alex? Remind me of her name. Is it Tressie?
Tressie McMillan Cotton, who is a journalist, sociologist, who's a columnist for New York Times, has called the outputs of such systems mid. And then we also follow Amba Kak at AI Now, who has called the systems janky. And I mean, mid is appropriate because you're taking a bit of an average of kind of the kind of writing. So it's very anodyne. It's very without life. A lot of people who are instructors have said, we really can't, I can kind of read this and understand, when these things have, a student has used this because the text is really, it's really flat line. And it also has no kind of, these technologies are outputting things based on word probabilities. And so there's not any kind of necessity to be internally coherent. One thing that people have mentioned is that you give it like a logic problem. Like, you have a man and a goat and I'm making this up. You have a man and a goat and a sack of grain, and they all need to get across the river, and you can only have, whatever. And then it describes it and, comes up with a ridiculous problem. And then I think my favorite one of these is you have a man and a boat, and both are trying to cross the river. The boat can only carry one person. What do you do? And it gives this really complex answer. It doesn't give the answer. The man gets in the boat and crosses the river, right? It's seen enough of these complicated logic problems, right? There's not any internal coherence.
We started the conversation, Emily, talking about Sam Altman and his attempt to make OpenAI simultaneously a for-profit and non-profit company. He, back in 2022, I think in response to your research, wrote on X, "I am a stochastic parrot and so are you." The R and the U being R and U rather than the correct spelling. Can one be like Altman? I mean, one can say many things about Altman, but he's not a stupid fellow. Can one be a smart stochastic parrot, or are all stochastic parrots by definition stupid, or are those useless words?
So I would steer clear of smart and stupid. That's not what it's about, right? So stochastic parrots say that the process behind the words coming out of ChatGPT is just entirely incomparable to what happens behind the scenes when people use words.
So he's not. So when Sam's saying it, he's being, I'm guessing, slightly ironic. He actually, you can't, as a human being, you can't be a stochastic parent.
So I think what's going on there is in between when our paper came out, it was leaked in late 2020, and when Sam Altman says that 2 years later in 2022, stochastic parrot got picked up as an insult that people who were very identified with the project of artificial intelligence took it to originally be an insult, that we were insulting the system that they were creating. And I think what Sam Altman is doing there, he's trying to, on the one hand, rehabilitate the term by like taking it as a badge of pride, but also, and more importantly, he is trying to elevate the systems that his company is building to the same level as people by diminishing what it is to be human. And this, I find this an incredibly dehumanizing thing to say, also very frustrating, but because he's got such a big platform, people now attribute that phrase to him. It's not his.
He's appropriated your words. Alex, you've been an insider. There are many still people insiders who believe in AI. Dario Amodei, for example, I think he's the founder, certainly the CEO of Anthropic, wrote a very influential piece called Machines of Loving Grace. Sam Altman's written all sorts of things saying that AI will improve the world. What do you make of the utopian element within AI, particularly in Silicon Valley?
Right. So there's a lot behind this. I mean, one of the things with Amade is that what he's been, I mean, he and Altman have this, I mean, first off, they have a financial incentive to do this, right? I mean, that's the easy and kind of facile kind of observation to make. But there are people who are true believers, people who believe in kind of a future that will lead to a time of limitless abundance, a time of doing, where people won't have to work. We're going to have machines that excel at all these different things. Altman has said, in the future, we're going to, instead of having something like universal basic income, which he and some other folks in Silicon Valley have become proselytizers for, he says that we'll need to offer people universal basic compute. So the notion that, we need to have this kind of thing as a public benefit. And
which he
Amade,
no doubt is selling to everybody one way or the other.
I mean, he's already trying to get, more of these things in government services. He's working, him and his lobbyists are working hand in glove in the US and the EU and in other jurisdictions. And so there's this notion of, doing this thing and having these things that are going to lead to limitless abundance. There's also a dark underbelly of this. I mean, there's a number of folks under the kind of umbrella of the test real bundle. So people who believe that there's going to be a future in which we merge with machines, or we're able to terraform Mars, or we're going to be able to go out and have 10 to the 58th number of people that are in the universe because we've led to such a singularity. And this is, for some people, this kind of arena of limitless abundance. And so they're under a number of different so test real covers a lot of these folks, but amongst them there are the long-termists. Those are the people that think there's going to be 10 to the 58 billion, or not billion, 10 to the 58. There's no I don't know what you would call billion as a part of speech. And then the rationalists that think that we need, the probability that we're going to have some kind of AI apocalypse in 2030 or something is nigh. Except this is a really outsized belief. This is a really ridiculous belief. The basics of the science don't work out. There's a notion that science will be automated. This is not how science works. I mean, science works with people. It works with a community of practice. It works for people working towards a common good. And so, I will say, being at Google, I mean, it's not a mainstream belief. I mean, I think it is a belief that belongs to a few people that are well positioned, to reap the windfalls, or they're ideologically committed. I mean, I think a lot of people at Google, and especially a lot of people that write software, don't think it can do their jobs for them. I think I saw a really good comment from Hacker News, which is a site that the startup accelerator Y Combinator host, and someone had posted on there, coding is 90% thinking about the problem and 10% actual coding, right? It's the process of actually thinking about it. Most people don't think this thing can do their jobs, but this is, people who are well positioned or have kind of a hobby horse on it ideologically like to perpetuate that narrative.
Are all these big companies, though, Alex, are they by definition, for better or worse, AI companies? We've done a couple of shows with Parmi Olsen, who writes for Reuters and Bloomberg. Her book, Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World, won the FT Book of the Year last year, 2024. She thinks that Demis Hassabis will be the next CEO of Google, which will make Google, for better or worse, an AI company. Are they all, at least in their own minds, are they all becoming AI companies, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Apple?
That's what the gold rush is. I mean, if you don't get into this, and then Google's already in a place where they're losing some of their search market to OpenAI, so they have to get into it, right? I mean, the economics of it making it so that their ad business is flailing and they need to find some place for growth. I think Google's kind of also has their own personal vendetta against OpenAI insofar as the transformer, the main architecture of these LLMs were developed at Google by people there, and then OpenAI as this, at the time when it started, this more quote unquote idealistic company with this nonprofit structure, began by Altman and with some involvement by Elon Musk, had posed itself as this kind of alternative. And so Google wants to get into this and get some kind of a pie. As I said, there's a huge amount of money in it, and people are looking for places where there's that new growth, and AI is the new hotness. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be, we could be moving on to the new hotness to something else next week. And I mean, Meta made a big bet with the metaverse, and now that business has completely failed, right? And they need to find this area of growth.
I take your point, Alex, but I mean, even Gary Marcus, who's frequent guest on the show, old friend of mine, I mean, he's as skeptical in many ways as you guys. I'm sure you know his work. You probably know him personally. Even he acknowledges that in the long run, what he calls AGI is inevitable. Would you disagree with Gary?
So he acknowledges that, suggests that you also think that that's true. Acknowledges that, introduces what we call in linguistics a presupposition.
Well, I'm just the interviewer, so I was just asking him whether he thinks it's inevitable. I'm not saying it is.
So it definitely seems clear from Gary Marcus's writing that he is a believer in AGI as something that is definitely coming to pass. He just doesn't think that large language models are the path to it.
Right.
That is not where we sit. Right? We say, look, none of this is inevitable. There's no reason to believe it's actually possible, let alone desirable. And so where we do agree with Gary Marcus is that LLMs are not a step towards AGI, but we part ways after that.
Yeah, and it's all about agency. So let's, I know you guys are busy, a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. I'm curious, Emily, you're a professor of linguistics. I'm sure you're all too familiar with George Orwell's famous essay on politics in the English language. Your book is in its own way extremely political. Is it any coincidence that this supposed language revolution, the LLM revolution, is the core political issue of our age?
Certainly what's going on with this technology is political. Technology is always political. I'm not sure it's the core political issue of our age. I don't think I dub it that.
Well, amongst the core, I mean, you've written a book about it. So
well, sure. I mean, we've written a book about it because this is, we've been working on fighting the hype around AI for a while through our podcast and through other scholarship. And so we decided to do a book. And absolutely, I mean, scholarship is always political, technology is always political, and language is always political and used to political ends. So I guess I don't see coincidences there, but I'm also not prepared to rank large language models as the core political issue of our age.
I mean, I'll jump in and say they're political insofar as we can think about the ways in which they displace workers or are attempting to displace workers. The fact that, one of the main political blocks in our country and others have been organized labor. They're political insofar as we think that we can offload the core functions of governing and governance to automated systems. They're political insofar as they offer more control over people. I mean, in politics, being who gets what and where and why. I mean, the core to politics. Then, yeah, of course, these are political technologies, and I would defer to folks like Dan McQuillan, who has a book called Resisting AI, in which he talks about AI as an authoritarian project. Notably thinking about the ways in which certain decisions get centralized to certain organizations, and how automated decision making technology and LLMs can be a way of doing that. And so, it's hard to rank order and say AI is the core political issue of the age, but is certainly a tool and being used as one in which right-wing governments and bureaucrats are aiming to consolidate power.
Yeah, and as you say, and the subtitle of your book is How to Fight Big Tech's Hype. Your book is about that, and you're also citing other writers. Let's end with the other section in the subtitle, Creating the Future We Want. Are you guys confident that you know what, quote unquote, we want? What is it that we want?
No, it's actually much more inclusive than that. We're basically saying we all have agency and we can all push back against this centralized push for what big tech wants. But that's not saying that we each are all going to want the same thing. We're basically asking everyone or helping everyone be empowered.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a vision of what, us as authors, Emily and Bender and Alex Hanna, we are academics and researchers, and the idea is that a future in which folks are flourishing is one in which they use technology to um, be locally adaptive, to be responsive to their immediate demands and needs. And we're not against technology. I mean, I hate that we have to say this. We are technologists. It's that we want a vision of the future in which people have more control over the technology themselves. They may be thinking about different models for data ownership or different models for compute ownership. And in the end of the book, we talk about multiple examples of this. One that is a great example is Teheku Media. That is an organization that is a language language technology organization, and they have technologies of machine translation and automatic speech recognition for translating for the Maori language in Eritrea, also called New Zealand. And the data there is controlled by the community. There's different kinds of access to knowledge and data that has differential knowledge. Some of it is available for training, some of it is not. And so and they control the compute of that technology and who gets to deploy it.
How would one of you respond to Steve Jobs' controversial notion? Remember, before he came out with the iPhone, he said, I know what you want, you don't know what you want, and I'm going to give it to you. And of course, it did seem as if he knew what we want. Now we all use iPhones. Is there any truth in that? Do we really know what we want? Or are some of us, by definition, when it comes to new tech, intuitively conservative because we want to maintain things as they are?
So you seem to be setting up a notion that either you've got the Steve Jobs type people who can create products that are going to sell really well that no one else knows exists, or it's just status quo. You don't get anything new. And what we're looking for is a world in which people and communities are empowered to build technology that they use for themselves and that doesn't get used on them. So I think there's actually a broad space out there aside from those two things. And sure, it's great when people come up with fun new toys to play with, especially if they can build them without massive labor exploitation and environmental consequences. And that can be part of the world too, although we would like to, constrain the labor exploitation and massive environmental consequences.
Are there other examples of that? I mean, Alex came up with an AI example, but in other technological revolutions, are there models that we can use for getting to a future that we all want?
So I think another interesting model to look at is actually the way that information systems are managed in libraries and library science. And that is a sort of a centralized thing, right? You don't have everyone having their own little library, but it is also a public good. And if we look to the practices of librarians and library science around organizing information and making it accessible, and doing that I'm thinking here of work of Anna Lauren Hoffman and Raina Bloom, doing it in a way that sort of meets people where they are in the public libraries, that's another wonderful example of technological systems that really help communities.
And one other example I want to point out, I mean, is I think there was an interesting moment after Elon Musk bought Twitter and decided to
Mm.
disastrously rename it X. So there was a lot of people moving to the Fediverse, so Mastodon and Pixelfied and a number of other technologies. And so one of the kind of moves there was to find a way to move away from a centralized system to kind of a protocol that people shared with distributed hosting services. Now, that's not a perfect, system by any regards, but at least there's some kind of a move to try to find ways in which people can manage their own infrastructure and communicate with different infrastructures as they want. And so there's lots of different proposals for things like that, going back to moving away from Web 2.0, which I think a lot of people are not happy. It seemed like it was very novel at first to get everybody onto Facebook, but now you go onto Facebook now, and it's like a deserted mall with AI slop and Shrimp Jesus everywhere, right? So I mean, if you haven't seen the kind of memes around Shrimp Jesus, definitely look these up on 404 Media and others. And so thinking about what it would mean to get away and think about a web that is more distributed is a helpful kind of analog as well.
Is that really Web3, Alex?
I mean, I think the Web3 notion was kind of what we're in now, the blockchain, the NFTs. Maybe we're on to Web 4, or maybe we need to return to Web 1.0, but without as much exclusion and racism and sexism and whatnot. So maybe it is a kind of a return and we learn from the past and build towards a new future.
Well, there you have it. The AI Con, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want, by my two guests, M.A.M. Bender, Alex Hanna. The book is out tomorrow. Congratulations, guys, on the new book. Important new contribution to this endless debate. No doubt it will continue for many more years. We'll get you back on the show.